So Tablet magazine published 2 days ago this article. Is the Women's March melting down? Millions of women mobilised against gender inequality in the election of Donald Trump 2016, but only 4 of them ended at the top, and the consequences have been enormous. And the things we are being told in this article, if true, if even half of it is true, are absolutely staggering. I'm going to skip the preamble of how these activists all came into contact with one another. I'll leave a link in the description as usual, and you can read it at your own time, because it's just not that important as far as I can see. But after gathering this group of female activists of obviously many different faiths and races, they brought them all together for a meeting in November 2016, and listen to this. According to several sources, it was there in the first hours of the first meeting for what would become the Women's March that something happened that was so shameful to many who witnessed it, they chose to bury it like a family secret. Almost 2 years would pass before anyone present would speak about it. It was there that, as the women were opening up about their backgrounds and personal investments in creating a resistance movement to Trump, Perez and Mallory allegedly first asserted that Jewish people bore a special collective responsibility as exploiters of black and brown people, and even, according to a close second-hand source, claimed that Jews were proven to be the leaders of the American slave trade. Now that's something that's said by the alt-right and Louis Farrakhan. I actually know that that's a story, a narrative. I haven't actually looked into it. I have no idea what the truth of it is. But I know that the narrative is pushed by the alt-right, and now I know that it's pushed by Louis Farrakhan as well. So, I mean, this is absolutely wild that this would be the beginning of the Women's March. This is how it started, with black people attacking Jews who are taking part in this. To this day, Mallory and Bland deny any such statements were ever uttered, either at the first meeting or at Mallory's apartment, but there was a particular conversation about how white women had centered themselves, and also around the dynamics of racial justice, and why it was essential that racial justice be a part of the women's rights conversation. But she and Mallory insisted it never had anything to do with Jews. Oh, it just has to do with white people. That's fine then. As Mallory told Tablet, they said that they'd been particularly sensitive to the fact that they'd been invited to the meeting by white women and wanted to be sure they weren't about to enter into an unfair arrangement. Other than that, there was no particular conversation about Jewish women or any group of people in particular. Well, I don't believe that. None of the other women in attendance would speak openly to Tablet about the meeting, but multiple sources with knowledge of what happened confirmed the story. Following an initial 30-minute phone call with the Women's March coordinators Mallory and Bob Bland, Tablet submitted a detailed list of follow-up questions to the group by email and received a written response. Answers from both exchanges are quoted at length in this article. As its fame grew, so did the questions about the Women's March origin story, including first privately within inner circles of the organisations, and questions pertaining to the possible anti-Jewish statement made at that very first meeting. And that wasn't the only incident from the initial encounter that would have far-reaching consequences. Within a few months of the original marches, key figures who came from outside or stood apart from the inner circle of the Justice League, an initiative of the Gathering for Justice, that left the organisation. These are activist organisations. Many of those involved began questioning why it was that, among the many women of various backgrounds interested in being involved in the march's earliest days, power had consolidated in the hands of a leadership who all had previous ties to one another. Well, that's cronyism for you, isn't it? And at least in one case, who had defended Bill Cosby as the victim of a conspiracy. Great optics on that. The march leaders would be named 2007's Women of the Year by Glamour magazine. Everything went swimmingly for Tamika Mallory, Bob Bland, Carmen Perez and Linda Sarsour. Kirsten Gillibrand called them the suffragists of our time. Well, that's aged well, hasn't it? The Women's March leaders have often dismissed their critics as right-wing or driven by racism, but I can't believe that they would do such a thing. But over the last 2 months, their fiercest challenges have come from within their own shop, with women of colour, their local organisers, often leading the pack. As of this article's publication, numerous state chapters have broken off from the national organisation, so the Women's March is breaking up. This article is absolutely huge, so I'm not going to go through the whole thing now, but I just wanted to really cover the way in which the Women's March was conceived and by the people that it was conceived by. All of these identity politicians are bad news. When someone says, well, as an X, I should get something special, you should probably wonder what their motivation for doing so is.